Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, June 1st, 2017. Hello again, everyone. I'm Mario Hawani back inside our New York City studio. So is the A-Team, and they've promised me this week no shenanigans, no laughing, no jokes. It's a very serious show. All right, let's go. That is Luke Thomas. Look at him. He is so serious, he's not even looking at the camera. Of MMAfighting.com and, of course, Sirius XM. That is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, of MMAfighting.com. And, of course, that is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim, a.k.a. Mr. Reliable of the Washington Post. Good to see you guys. It's great to have the A-Team back for the second straight week. How exciting. All right, guys.
Together so far, too.
We are. Yes, let's keep it going. So, much to discuss. I want to start this week with the women's featherweight division in the UFC. Now, of course, the men's featherweight division very much in focus this week. Aldo and Holloway, main event, UFC 212. We'll talk about them in a second, but we have to talk first, in my opinion, about Germaine de Randamie and the state of this division. So finally, we are starting to get a sense of where she's at. She won the belt in early February, essentially fell off the face of the earth, hasn't done many interviews, hasn't posted on social media. Late last week, her manager, Brian Butler, telling me that she doesn't want to fight Cyborg. She's a cheater. Cyborg's a cheater. We're not fighting her. And then she comes out on her own social media, which is now protected, by the way, saying, yeah, you know, I always wanted to go down to 135. That was my plan. I'm not fighting Cyborg. My hand is still a little messed up. What should the UFC do with this division at this point? They haven't signed anyone. Megan Anderson's fighting in Invicta next. There's no other featherweights. What should they do?
Same thing they should have done from the beginning. And let's be clear about this. Like, de Randamie obviously has a tremendous amount of blame to absorb here for the state of things. I think so does Cyborg, and I think so does the UFC. All of them have jacked this up to a degree that is hard to overstate. But I do believe, I really believe this, there is a path forward. Why reinvent the wheel? Just do what Invicta's been doing. Stop the pretenses. You need 20 women minimum for a division. They don't have that, at least not right now. Maybe they can build that way. Just make it the Cyborg division, man. That's what the show is about. Get her in a fight, make it for the title, strip de Randamie, and then just line them up. If they can make the Zingano fight in a reasonable timeline, great. If they can't, that's great too. People want to see her feed, so feed her.
Okay, but one small issue with that, Cyborg's contract is up in October, so is it tricky to put her in a title fight? But this is a person who's a little bit unpredictable.
Right.
She might walk away. You don't want her walking away with that belt to Bellator.
So re-up it. You know, find a deal.
Re-up it first and then
make her an offer she can't refuse. Either she's important to you or she's not. But if you're going to keep her, you need to keep her for the long term. And if you're not going to keep her, if you're not having any plans beyond the expiration of her contract, there's 0 points to her being there even right now.
Let me ask you this, Chuck. You know, in early December, we were sitting, actually having lunch after one of these episodes, and word came through that Cyborg had been provisionally suspended by USADA. Now it ends up that
I remember that. Yes.
She doesn't get actually suspended. It's kind of a mess of a situation, but she got the retroactive therapeutic use exemption. And yet, de Randamie and her team are saying, look, she just failed another test. And I remember at that time we were like, there is no way Cyborg's going to rebound from this. This is it. This is the nail. And now it almost feels like Germaine has made Cyborg into this sympathetic figure, that all the hate is on Germaine and none on Cyborg. How did she mess this up so bad?
Well, the first thing she did was, I mean, you go back to UFC 208 in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
What was the driving factor of that whole fight card? There's this division opening up, but it wasn't the two people participating in the fight. It was the one who was looming over it, right? Like, that was the whole reason that this card was put together and everything else. So you just start with that and you think, de Randamie gets in there, she actually has a controversial win. It felt very, very... the card sucked, and the fight itself wasn't that good because there was a couple of obvious fouls and things like that. And the first thing she does is talk about her hand. I just feel like it just has gone downhill from there. It has literally gone downhill. She has not done anything right in terms of being a champion, in terms of really embracing, I guess, this position that she's in. Everybody knew that the specter of Cyborg was hovering over that event. Everybody knew that all roads through that fight led to Cyborg. I mean, the whole reason it exists. And if she didn't mean to, you know what I mean? If she didn't really mean to go through with it and win the title and then welcome on whoever's coming up, you know, whoever's next, which would be Cyborg, I'm not sure what it was about. It just feels like charades at this point. I don't really understand.
Her? Because remember, she was campaigning for the rematch against Holly Holm.
Yeah, I remember that. But that's all of this, though, is again more missteps, because anybody who wants to blame her can find easy ways to do so. Because you could be like, well, she wanted to fight Holly Holm, she was ready for that, and her hand was going to be okay for that type of thing, or whatever. I don't really know. It's bizarre because there is no division, but then you get a champion who disappears, and the first thing she says is all this stuff that's not 100% accurate either. And it's very tiresome, man. I tweeted that out, and everybody's like, well, you can't blame her. There's a lot of people saying you can't blame her for taking this stance. And I'm like, well.
Sure you can.
Yeah, I was like, yes, you can, but that's not even what I meant. I meant it's tiresome. The whole situation is just tiresome at this point.
I mean, I don't know that you could possibly handle a situation worse than she's handled this. You know, what is the charge she levels against Cyborg? She's a cheater. Well, Germaine in her title-winning bout, twice fouled her opponent. Twice.
Different levels of cheating, of course.
It's a different level, but it's cheating.
But it was also the same foul, the same kind of foul.
The same foul twice.
Yeah.
I mean, if you hit somebody out after the bell, to me, that is as big a deal as certainly anything what Cyborg did. I mean, she obviously, whatever she did, she got a retroactive exemption, so it couldn't be that bad. So right there, you're gonna be, if you are living in a glass house, don't be throwing cheater charges at somebody else. That's one thing. And then the second part of it is, you know, like I know fans often will like to throw out, well, so-and-so's afraid of this person. And, you know, these are professional fighters. It's not that. You know, DJ's afraid of TJ Dillashaw. That's not true. He's just looking for a better deal, looking for a better fight. Here's the one time that I can like maybe say, yeah, this fighter's just afraid of stepping in the cage with Cyborg. I mean, I'm almost reluctant to even say in her case, but if there's ever been an example of a fighter who is afraid to step in with somebody, this would be the one.
And I don't even blame her, to an extent anyway. To an extent. How many bantamweight women want to jump up and fight Cyborg? Very few. So in that sense, she's not unusual. The problem is you took the title fight. Not even a fight in that weight class. The title fight in that weight class.
Is that why you have to blame her, though?
What do you mean?
What did you expect was going to happen if you won the belt?
No, I understand. I'm just saying, insofar as she is a natural bantamweight. There are many natural bantamweights who are like, I'm not touching Cyborg. Okay, fair enough. But if you elect to cross that line, all bets are off. And let me say one thing real quickly about Cyborg, because she was like, Cyborg's a cheater, blah, blah. Well, Cyborg has had her issues. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But there is also this bizarre mythology around steroid use in MMA. We don't actually know the impacts, by the way. It stands to reason, of course, it provides a benefit, but how much? In strength sports, for example, they have studied this. They believe prolonged PED use can, on average, add about 10% to what you ordinarily lift. Now, what does that mean? Competitively, that's a ton of advantage. But it doesn't turn you into a superhuman. So if you're deadlifting 400 pounds, now you can deadlift about 440, 450, right? And that's a lot competitively, you can imagine, right? But I had someone email me today being like, why isn't the media talking about how steroids have fundamentally changed Cyborg? And maybe they have, but he sent me a video and he was like, she's deadlifting 675 pounds. This video is floating around. This guy clearly had never been in a gym in his life. They were 10-pound bumper plates that they look like normal Olympic plates because you can drop them and they bounce. It was less than 400 pounds. She has videos out there doing 300 pounds. So that's a lot of weight. Here's my point. People are turning whatever she has done in her life. They don't even know the impact. They have no way of measuring it, and they just say she's the boogeyman all of a sudden because it's a convenient excuse to prop her up as some kind of villain or evil character or at this point, straw man against an argument before fighting her.
And the other thing is, these are the facts. She's only failed one drug test. She's legitimately only failed one drug test, and it was in 2011. And she's been tested up the wazoo by USADA. She, in fact, was doing USADA testing before the UFC got on board with USADA. So you can't point to that test in December and say she failed because she didn't. USADA themselves said that she did not fail. They granted her the therapeutic use exemption retroactively. So she failed one test. I mean, could you imagine if everyone had this stance, you know, towards Anderson Silva and Vitor Belfort?
Exactly right.
You know, it's just it doesn't fly. And then to me, like the part that's making this so frustrating and tiring and tiresome, as you put it, is why can't the UFC just come out and tell us what's going on? You know what I mean? Yesterday I reached out to the UFC and said, could we get some kind of update so that it doesn't make Germaine look worse, Cyborg, all these tweets and things like that? Like, just what is the state of this division? We're not ready to announce anything just yet. What could be taking so long? It was 4 months ago, this fight. The champion is clearly saying she doesn't want to fight the #1 contender. What are we waiting for at this point? There are no other featherweights. It's not like you could say, you know what, Cyborg, we're going to have you fight someone else. We're going to go with the #2 or 3 rank. There isn't the #2 or 3 rank. The fact that Megan Anderson wasn't signed speaks volumes. The fact that they haven't signed any other featherweight speaks volumes. They are not interested, and I don't blame them. They are not interested in investing in that division. Why? Because there aren't enough featherweights. We all said that. And people say to me like, oh, you guys used to sit on this show and talk about that division, and now you're going back on your word. No, we said, as you just said, be in the Cyborg business. And being in the Cyborg business means having a featherweight division for Cyborg. It doesn't mean, you know, creating this whole thing when you're taking 135ers up and like that's a mess of a situation. And that's why they botched it with that title fight in Brooklyn, as we said. And they're continuing to make that same mistake. That title fight should never have happened if Cyborg wasn't involved. And yes, they needed a main event and they needed a title fight, but it was a big mistake to do that fight because now you have this situation. If Cyborg was involved, then it was worth it. If Cyborg wasn't involved, you needed to wait for her, and they didn't.
It is literally, as Luke called it, the Cyborg Division. It is come down to literally being the Cyborg Division, because if the champion, Durandame, is saying that she wants to fight her next fight at 135, so she's abandoning the division. It is the Cyborg Division in that she's the only featherweight there now. That's kind of the crazy thing. She
was the only featherweight beforehand, right?
Right. There's
Holm
nothing
and
else.
Durandame aren't featherweights.
And that's it's hard to imagine that, you know.
Should the UFC just cut ties with Cyborg at this point? If they don't want to be in that business, is she not worth the headaches, all this confusion, or is she big enough to where you keep her around to do this sort of thing, which they've never done before, and keep her from going to sign with Scott Coker?
You'd like to see them make a definitive decision one way or another, because I feel like we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I feel like the UFC, Dana White particularly, will take the side of anybody else when the Cyborg is brought up with situation. You don't really feel like he's endorsing her, really. He's really behind her, or he wants her to be a star. I mean, that's just the facts. If you go down and look at all the history of all the things he said about her and everything else, and even as she's made her way in the UFC, I just don't feel like they're embracing her on that level. So it's either you get behind her and you do this thing right, or you just, you got to cut ties with her at some point, because what's the point? I know that I think on some level they understand basically that she's a star. She's a star on some level, and if you let her go, she's just going to go to Bellator and create whatever she's going to do there. But it just seems like a hostage situation otherwise. If you're not going to, like, the Megan Anderson thing was befuddling to me. If that's the one one option where there's two people who are like wanting to fight, and usually Cyborg has trouble, as we're going through with the champion right now. You can't find these people. She wants to fight, and yet they still don't make it. I don't really know what they're doing.
It is kind of bizarre that the UFC will hang on to her in order to keep her from going to Bellator, where presumably she could earn them a ton of money. And yet they're saying, okay, well, she would go over there and earn a ton of money for them, but they're not thinking creatively enough to say, well, if she can make a ton of money over there, she can make a ton of money right here, but they're just not doing it. It's kind of it's kind of a weird twist.
There's a Scott Coker approach where, let's take the Will Brooks situation. He was really upset with his scenario, and you could take Jake Shields as well back in the Strikeforce days. Scott Coker's approach is basically, if there's a real malcontent, they just let him go. Now, that's very different reasons for that, not chief of which is when a fighter in one of those scenarios complains about their situation, it magnifies how small time they are, not the fighter, but the organization. So there's a real benefit in letting them go. So it's not apples to apples, but what I would say is the other benefit is even if the other organization can make money with them, there is just something to be said with getting rid of how poisonous the relationship can be. It does make things more prosperous. It does make things just a little bit easier. It makes life a little brighter, for lack of a better description. So I think Chuck's right. Maybe make one more push to see if they can get this going. And if they can't, it's time to move on. Even if it benefits Bellator, there's also a benefit UFC can reap as well.
It does really feel like from the get-go this relationship was just never meant to be. They tried to do the Ronda fight. They signed her. They put her in Invicta. Even dating back to that decision, she should have gone straight into the UFC, build her up. And now all this happening with Germaine, to me, is just another feather in Cyborg's cap. I mean, she truly comes across now as the most feared fighter in the world. Like, you have a champion who is literally saying, I want nothing to do with this person, and is kind of making up all these reasons as to why this fight shouldn't happen. And then, like, her street cred with the thing that happened with Angela Magana, regardless of how you feel about the whole situation, this is someone who if she doesn't like you, is going to walk up to you on the street and punch. I mean, look, we could talk about Ronda being Mike Tyson. She is the most feared fighter in the UFC right now.
Even Chris Weidman was monos.
Yes, he was in there and he was like, I want nothing to do. And I feel like she is so marketable in that sense. You know, if they could just get behind her and
she's literally bullying pro fighters.
Feed her.
I've said this before. There must be something too. Like we can see her side so easily all the time, but I have to think that there's some kind of complication besides just her previous drug use and everything. I feel like there's got to be more to it when she's doing negotiation, where she's into talks. It just like, how can you never get on the same page?
Yeah.
I feel like something from her camp has to be a little off. She must be sort of complicated to deal with in her own way. But I have no proof. I don't really talk to her camp that much, but I feel like that's got to be the case.
And I don't know what you've heard, but anecdotally, I've heard she's hard to work with. That they're demanding, and then they change the demands, and then they don't respond to demands, and that they can be a challenge to work with. UFC has worked with, to their credit, they have worked with a lot of different malcontents and a lot of different kinds. And the fact that they can't get anything going with her, I think, speaks poorly of both sides.
But when there's a will, there's a way, right? Maybe sometimes they want to work with these people, and in her case, they want her to be on the roster.
But I just don't think it's fair to blame the UFC. I'm sure they've got blame, but
I think both sides deserve blame here. But I find it amazing that we can't get any answers on the situation. And if you don't want to be in the business of putting on Cyborg fights, just let her walk away, as you said, because it's a toxic situation at this point. The featherweight division was a mistake, the way it was rolled out, and you hope that at some point we could get some clarity, because it's not like Jermaine could go and fight someone else. And last thing on this, is her reputation damaged beyond repair at this point? Like, could she really go back down to 135 and just be another fighter?
I don't think so. I mean,
what do you
if you win this title the way she won, like I said, controversially, and handled herself the way she has, then you're stripped of your title, let's say. They take it back, and you go down to 135. I just think that sticks with her forever, don't you? I mean,
I put a question on Twitter yesterday. I think maybe, I don't know if you responded or not, Chuck. Jesus,
probably did.
But we were talking about Aldo and the thing about Rogan said, and which I know we'll get to in a minute, which was, does that 13-second KO really damage his tarnished reputation? And there's a debate to be had about that. But I did ask, which sports figures out there whose most public failure ends up defining them? I don't think her Muay Thai past, I mean, for the super insiders, of course, her Muay Thai past can and will define her. But for the casual audience, this is going to absolutely stain her reputation.
Yeah.
I mean, people can resuscitate their reputation. These things do happen, but in order for that to happen, she would have to go down to 135 and be a dynamo. And I wouldn't like her chances against Amanda Nunes in a fight, not at all. So if she goes down to 135, I would sort of put her in the middle of the pack there somewhere.
Which is where she was.
Which is where she was, right. And so, and that's not going to regain whatever that luster is that accompanies the championship belt. And so I think it's possible, but I wouldn't think it's going to happen.
Well, good job for her at least giving Cyborg a nice little rosy light. You know what I mean? Because I feel like that's the weird, that you're right. When you started this off, you're mentioning that Cyborg becomes a sympathetic figure in the situation, and I'm not sure how you could have achieved that any other way.
Yeah.
So in some way she boosted her.
But it was the twofer. It was the Magana.
Sure.
That's true.
And by the way, here's to me the saddest part of this. I know there are people in the UFC, including Sean Shelby, who has told me this. They believe that she has a very good chance against Cyborg. Like, I actually think that Jermaine versus Cyborg it's not, a pick'em fight, but of all the fighters that Cyborg has fought as of late, she possesses the best chance 100%. To give her a tough fight, right?
100%.
I mean, with her Muay Thai background, and she hung in there with Holly Holm. Obviously, she won the fight. It was controversial, but look how she was looking before that. She's no scrub. You know what I mean? Like, just go in there and I don't know.
She's got to be the one who believes that, though.
Remember when Jermaine signed with...
Cyborg has the scarlet letter about PED use. Some of it fair, a lot of it not. But there is this outsized reputation that she has that doesn't really comport with reality. As a consequence, I would argue, hysteria around what really is the ramifications of performance-enhancing drug use in MMA.
I just remember when Coker was obviously the head of Strikeforce, it was Amanda Nunes and it was Jermaine Durandamy that everyone said, these are potential opponents. Because remember, after Cyborg beat Gina Carano, everyone was like, who's next? There's no one next. And I remember them talking about those two. Nunes doesn't want to fight her. She's champ at 135, fine. And now Jermaine does want to fight her. A mess of a situation. I just hope we can get some clarity so we can all move on from this. All right, let's move along now to the men's featherweight division. They are in focus, as I said. It's Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway for the official title. It's a unification bout, headlining act of 212 this Saturday from Rio. And as you mentioned, Joe Rogan has said this. Fans have said this. I've thought of it. Now that you have two guys One that was just knocked out not that long ago by Conor in 13 seconds. Another that lost to Conor, 4 years ago at this point, his last loss, Max Holloway. Fighting for this belt that Conor pretty much gave up due to inactivity. How do we feel about it? I mean, on paper, it's a fantastic fight, but does it feel like they're still fighting for the interim belt, the fake belt, because none of them beat Conor?
Not to me. I know a lot. I mean, look, and opinions are going to vary here. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. Fans are going to feel the way they feel. And I've really said part of this view of Aldo and this division generally, I think, is two things. One, there is just a newer generation of fans that didn't see Jose Aldo blow through Pequeno Nogueira, that didn't see him blow through. I remember exactly where I was when I was watching him own Mike Brown, and I couldn't believe how easy he made it look. And then on to Faber and everything else. If you watched all of that, and then you see him get stretched in 13 seconds, it's part of the story, but it doesn't undo what he was doing to everyone else. So to me, this feels like a bit of a crossing to a cleaner territory that the division really needed, but those newer fans may not feel that way. And the other part is, look, Jose Aldo went out of his way to not market himself. He went out of his way to not learn English. So a lot of his fights were kind of like this on everyone's radar. The one time he was on everyone's radar, he got stretched in 13 seconds. That is going to stick with people. Is it fair that people view him necessarily off those 13 seconds? Of course it is not. He is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He is the most dominant featherweight, easy. But I can kind of understand why people feel that way. I just think over time, as more of these fights like this happen, as the title is unified, as the division just moves past Hurricane McGregor, I do think sympathies will move in the right direction toward who's ever holding that belt.
Yeah, I feel like he's unshackled. This is the first time he's not under control of Conor McGregor, honestly, because when you look back through that whole lead up and then it didn't happen, then they lead up again, it's basically he's under Conor's control of the press conferences on down. Like you said, he's not one of those guys who loves to be in front of the camera. He doesn't want to do that stuff, but he did it for so long. Then he loses that way. He rebounds against Frankie Edgar, and it's almost a travesty that he's achieved so much in his career to have that one thing be his defining moment. But even he was fighting for an interim title for that fight because of the whole Conor McGregor situation. He only inherited the title itself because Conor McGregor went and beat Eddie Alvarez. So he's still tied to him. Every destinational point has been tied to Conor McGregor. This is the first time you finally get rid of the Conor McGregor side of it, and you finally just have Jose Aldo again. And to me, that's kind of cool because that guy, if you just look back at the 2-3 years of this Conor McGregor stuff, it's been a lot of fun, but from his perspective, what a slice of hell, man, because he's had to deal with so much and then watch his reputation go down and everything else. And so much focus was on him as a person, so much focus was on that 13-second knockout that people didn't really give him the hoopla anymore of what he has accomplished. And I feel like that's what you get to restore without any kind of influence from Conor McGregor at this point.
Yeah, a 13-second knockout is obviously a big, bold statement that you can't avoid, and you got all credit to Conor McGregor for that great counterpunch and laying him out there. But Jose Aldo's never been in a fight that I can remember where he's been kind of controlled by anybody. Now, he's never been in a fight where somebody else had the advantage over him. Every time he's fought, even in that, I think that was, what was the fight? It was one of his fights where he kind of like got really tired toward the end, but
the
Hominick, that was the one. And that was about the closest thing where you thought, wow, he's a little vulnerable here. But every other fight, even, the Frankie Edgar fights, as much as I love how Frankie Edgar fights against him, man, Aldo just was in charge. He's been in charge of every fight he's had. So to me, his reputation, in my mind, would have been more tarnished if McGregor had sort of picked him apart over, a 3 rounds and then finally finished him off. The 13-second thing, yeah, it's a big, bold headline. And again, all credit to McGregor for connecting with that punch. But we never saw Aldo be mastered by somebody. And so to me, he's still the guy. He's still that guy at the top rung of the ladder. And we'll see on Saturday, whether somebody can finally challenge him on that level.
What about the way he talks about that fight, the way he talks about Conor? It's almost like he's in denial that ever happened. He said, I never lost the belt. I'm still the champion. Doesn't care to fight him. Does that do him more harm than good? Or is that the way he should go about it?
In my mind, the thing that Luke was talking about, and Chuck as well, about how he's never really, hasn't learned English, and he's not been much of a talker. In some ways, the fact that he's not a real loquacious guy lets him get away with saying that kind of weird stuff, because you almost think, well, he just is not able to, he really can't, express a sort of a deep thought about his fight career at any length. And it's just him, being in kind of, yeah, of course he's in denial, but I don't really look at it as, like if McGregor, after the Diaz fight, the first Diaz fight where he got choked out, if he had come out and kind of like acted that way, it would have been really discrediting for him because he's always been a big talker. But instead, he came out and talked honestly and really kind of helped enhance his reputation by the way he dealt with that loss. Aldo is not about talk. So when he's talking, what I would say talking nonsense, I kind of don't really think that much of it. To me, Aldo is all about what he does in the cage when he's fighting. That's the entirety of my relationship with Aldo, is watching him fight.
Honestly, if you look at it and you say, what would have happened if, in that 50-50 type of situation exchange, Conor was the one who went down? What would he be like right now? Would he be in denial of these things? Yes, I think he would be. I think he'd be very similar, but he'd actually be able to.
But it's a little different because he wasn't the guy with the 10-year unbeaten streak.
It's
he
true.
wasn't the champion.
It's true.
When you hear him say, "I never lost the belt. I'm still the champion."
I mean,
doesn't it seem unhealthy? Doesn't it seem like an unhealthy?
Well, it also tells me he is stuck on it. He keeps saying he's past it, but it tells me that he's really. This is something that he's really stuck on. You wonder to what extent. Now, this is what I was really curious about when he fought Frankie Edgar. I was like, to what extent will he have stuff taken from him now? Will he be the same guy? He looked pretty good in there, so I'm no longer concerned with that. But I do feel like this is one of those things. I feel like the belt and all that means really nothing to him. Honestly, I think he would give it all up if he could fight Conor McGregor again. That's the way I think. I think that's his whole goal in fighting right now is to get back to him.
All those guys are delusional. Every one of them. There's not a sober, rational guy. What is sober and rational about fist fighting in a cage for cash? Basically nothing. Basically nothing. It's a totally irrational thing that we do, and us included in covering it. But you can find ways to rationalize it. I'm the baddest dude on earth. There's no one that can beat me. Yeah, is what he is doing delusional? Of course it is. We just don't know if it's motivating delusional or poisonous delusional. The Max Holloway fight's going to help us figure that out.
It also comes down to fan bases and how they want to process delusion. Because a lot of times on a fan base, if it's Conor McGregor, you're going to have a lot of people who will go along with every delusion he has. They're going to believe everything he says and eat it all up. But if it's a guy like Jose Aldo, who you said never really endeared himself to a public, he'll say things like this, and most people look at him like, what, are you crazy? You know what I mean? It's just, there's different kinds of processing when it comes down to that sort of thing.
Would also love to see him somewhat address Conor if he wins the fight. He had that great post-fight interview after the Chad Mendes fight where he said, I'm the king, he's the prince, and we've got a joker. I thought that was, again, not a loquacious guy, but that was so perfect to kickstart this feud with Conor. And I would love to see him either address it or say, look, I've moved on. The guy's not here. He's not cutting to 145 anymore. He's got business to take care of at 155. I've moved on. But to just kind of pretend like it didn't happen seems somewhat unhealthy.
How would you feel if you didn't get that rematch? You know what I mean? Even if you got the rematch and lost,
I would turn it.
There would be closure. He has no closure.
Yeah, but I would turn it on him. He wants nothing to do. He knows it was a fluke. He knows that he got lucky, and now he's scared to fight me. Turn it on him.
Because honestly,
try to get him
there would
to
be a
fight
lot of
you.
people who are going to side with that. Especially, let's say he goes in there and just smokes Max Holloway. It looks more and more like an aberration every time. Like you're going to be able to do that. Yes. And it should be like you have no other contest for it other than his other fights.
I see almost not even a glimmer of a rematch there. If you're Conor McGregor, why would you step in the cage? You've fought the guy who's been the best featherweight for a decade, and you smoked him in 13 seconds. How can you possibly top that? Beat him again? Great, but
Conor's going to fight where the money is, and if that's a money fight, and if people, because he's not doing anything to make it a money fight.
I know, but if you're Jose Aldo, how exhausting must it be to keep thinking about this guy, and I don't want to do another world tour and all that stuff.
So then I wish he would just say that. As opposed to, my one issue is pretending like it never happened.
Like the problem is, it's not just like everyone's like fighting.
That's why he lost some consciousness.
Everyone's like fighting Conor as red panty night, and it is because you get a big fat check at the end of it. But you know how exhausting it must be to fight that guy. All the press. I mean, remember Rafael dos Anjos sitting there like a frog being boiled, didn't even realize how bad it was going to get for him, and he got not saved exactly, but he didn't have to go through more of that rigmarole.
Yeah.
Aldo had to do it worse than anyone. I can see how it would just be like, fuck this, I'm not doing it anymore.
Okay, so let me ask you guys this. For the UFC, is it better if Max Holloway wins? Because Max Holloway is on this amazing streak.
Yes.
His last loss was against Conor Bruce so long ago. They were in a different spot. They were on the prelims, for God's sakes. And he opens up a couple possibilities. A, if he wins, him versus Edgar, Max versus Edgar is a fresh fight. I feel like people don't feel the same way about Holloway McGregor 1 as they do about Aldo McGregor 1, meaning they kind of feel like Holloway's a different fighter. This is a fun, you know what I'm saying? So do you guys feel like deep down inside they'll never admit it, but the UFC brass is kind of secretly hoping that Holloway wins?
1,000%.
Yeah.
Right.
How could you
Holloway
say
speaks
no?
a version of English, so that's like
Pigeon brother.
No, let's be serious. That division, everyone clowned it when McGregor left, and for good reasons to some extent. But I think the truth of it, if you look around, it's a really young division. There's a lot of really young guys that are slowly beginning to supplant the elderly. Now, not quite. Rodriguez fell short against Edgar, but you can see those things kind of coming
He's
up.
not going anywhere.
Right, and they want to usher that in. And Holloway, I mean, look. McGregor beat him, and McGregor beat him injured. You can't take that away from him. But we all said on this very show after that fight, you know what? I think looking down the line, we're going to say that's one of McGregor's better wins because Max Holloway is a beast and because he was injured. No doubt about it. The guy has radically improved and transformed his game. He is so much better. It would be a fresh matchup if they can make it, even at 155. It would be infinitely better for that division. If
Not
that
that
guy won.
145 was like a ghost town back before McGregor came in, but it was a very quiet place where some of the dejects from 155 might go try their hand. You know, it was like one of those types of places that would import people. Then he came along, and it was a lively party. All these people came to life, and it's and now it feels like the party has left. Well, what would be the one? You don't really want to go back to the guy who was the quiet. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like Max Holloway, and especially because given his win streak, given his personality, has he's kind of emerged and gotten a little older, and all that stuff, plus representing Hawaii and things like that. I feel like that would all be fresh coats of paint on something that probably needs it in terms of fanfare. You know what I mean? I like what Jose Aldo can do, but I just don't think that he's going to generate that sort of fanfare on his own. So I think a guy like Max Holloway just reopens up. It kind of gets everything rolling again in a different direction that has a lot of freshness to it.
Especially if it's a real beatdown, if it's a fight that Holloway, if he he like a sustained beatdown and really, gives Aldo the kind of beating that nobody has ever beaten him, given him. That would be something else. I mean, I think obviously having Jose Aldo as your champion is not a bad thing, but for all the reasons these guys both recounted, they're having this fresh blood in there, a guy who's been climbing and climbing and climbing, and for him to finally get to that top rung would be pretty spectacular.
Frankie Edgar's got to be rooting big time for Holloway, right?
Of course,
Because there is no clamoring for that trilogy fight with Aldo.
And correct me if I'm wrong, guys. I know you addressed it. I don't feel like they're fighting for second place here because I truly believe, we've talked about this 1,000 times, if you don't defend your title within a year or have a fight booked within a year, you can't just hold up the division. So I actually feel, again, I feel like the UFC was well within their rights to move on, to strip him. I just don't like the way they did it, the justification for it, the reason for it, because they needed a main event for that Toronto show. But I have no problem with them moving on. I mean, he won the belt a year and a half ago. You can't just sit there. And by the way, I wouldn't have a problem with them doing it in the lightweight division come November. Now, if they do the Floyd fight and right after they book him in his next fight, in October, November, fine, okay, we understand you took a left turn, I get it, but now he's back on track. But with the featherweight division, everyone can't just sit, because could you imagine if the shoe was on the other foot? Imagine Aldo never gave Conor that shot. All hell would have broken loose. So I actually like this card. I think it's a fun card. I'm looking forward to watching it, from home, a little different for a pay-per-view, at least for me personally. Claudia Gadelha versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz, I think is a fantastic fight at 115. The debut of Marlon Moraes on FS1 for free is great.
In a super tough fight.
Yeah, Rafael
Super
Sunsao.
tough
He's never
fight.
fought anyone like him at World Series of Fighting. Olawale Bangboshe, I think, is a great fighter. He's on the pay-per-view. But I want to ask you guys about Vitor Belfort because my head hurts with this whole situation. So he said he was going to retire. Now he's saying he's not going to retire. Now UFC is saying, well, he has one fight left on his contract. What? Should we have just left this a retirement fight for pay-per-view purposes and then address all of this afterwards? Like, make this the retirement fight.
Wave the white
What is
flag.
happening here? What?
Fake news.
On
Actual fake news.
What? Legit fake news.
Well, fake news is when you intentionally mislead, so we didn't intentionally mislead.
Well,
but
not on our part. They did.
yeah, well, how does he not know what's in his contract? I wonder how common that is. Or did he know and he was just doing this to get the fight he wanted on the card he wanted? Like, was he manipulative because he knew better, or was you can never tell with Vitor when he's speaking in front of a commission or he's talking to the media. You never can tell how much of it is just when the waterworks, how much of those are real, or what the ultimate aim is here, and when he's going to switch on a dime. It's classic Vitor, man. He's like he bleeds these sob stories, and then he just pulls the okie doke on you after the fact. I don't really know.
Wrap them in red tape, because honestly, every time we get into a Vitor Belfort thing, there's always a complication. It's always trying to figure something out. It's not like you can just think about his fight. You have to think about all.
And he's showing up with a dog, like he's like
a service dog.
Yeah, what is up with that?
Does he need a service dog?
The guy.
If you need a service dog, how do you have a license to fight?
To fight, yes. He looks like a 60-year-old man walking in Central Park with that thing.
God.
When that dog goes in the cage with him, that's going to be where we've got to draw the line right there.
Like literally, blind people and veterans who have PTSD have service dogs.
Remember we talked about this fight when they booked in? We were like, this is a nice.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Waving goodbye.
Yes.
Like you get in Brazil, you get a guy who's obviously in his twilight of his career as well, a winnable fight. You know what I mean? You have a chance to go out on top. He's looked increasingly bad, honestly, if you really go back his last 5 fights. And then you have the hush tones of that TRT year in 2013, where he's smoking everybody and how he's looked in juxtaposition to coming out of that and everything. It's just everything about him is very difficult, and I feel like that's. I feel like the UFC has to really think about that sometimes. Like, man, every time we book this guy, it becomes a big complication. But this one is weird. I just thought that it was all set up. He even was talking about, what was it, the classic
Legends.
people, the Legends division, and all this type of thing. And I'm like, it just seemed like we were heading. This was it, sayonara, buddy. Good, we love your career and all that stuff. And now here we are again.
I know it's not really on the UFC. I mean, it's not. There's nothing wrong with the fact that he had another fight in his contract. If he was saying he was retiring after this one,
He can walk away, yeah.
But
I prefer the Rumble Johnson way. Say you're going to retire, and then a month later say you got the itch.
Got that itch, player.
Don't unretire before you get the retirement fight
I
under
want to
your
have that
belt.
itch checked out before.
What a bizarre. Do we agree that the Marlon Moraes thing is kind of flying under the radar a little bit?
Big time.
This
And
feels like
especially
it should be a
a
bigger
fight-
deal, right?
Well, here's the problem. People didn't watch World Series of Fighting.
Right.
Let's be real, they didn't. And the other problem is, as good as he is, and as interesting as he is to the hardcores, while he's fighting a ridiculously tough fight against Rafael Sunsao, people also don't know who he is.
yeah.
So they don't, like, if he was matched up with, I don't know, pick an exciting name at bantamweight, Garbrandt pre-champion, or Thomas Almeida, they'd be like, look back, or Aljamain Sterling.
Yeah.
So, but because it's Rafael Sunsao, there's not quite as much excitement, but look out. It's
crazy because the Sunsao couldn't get close enough to a title fight because of that very thing. Nobody knew who he was, and he had the injuries and all that stuff.
Real quickly, the most forgotten fight at UFC 200, TJ Dillashaw, Rafael Sunsao.
Yeah, and that's the only loss between them since 2011, which is nuts. When you think about that, these two guys coming together on the main event of the prelims.
Would you like to
There's
see
one
them
loss.
rethink that model? Because I feel like if you're asking people at this point to pay $65 for pay-per-views, shouldn't you put the best 5 fights on the pay-per-view like they used to? Because I feel like this is a pay-per-view fight. And then on the flip side, I say, okay, get him in front of the most eyeballs possible because he's a future star, so put him on FS1. But I still kind of look at that pay-per-view lineup and I say, like, Marlon should be on the pay-per-view. If that's the most prestigious, if that's what you're trying to get people to pay for, shouldn't you load it with the 5 best fights possible as opposed to spreading it out?
I guess the other problem, though, is like they have to give Combache what they want too. And you could say, well, he's Brazilian and so is Rafael Sunsao, but they got Borrachinha at the top of that, the middle of that card.
Yeah.
I think they really kind of believe in him.
Yeah.
Maybe Combate even asked for him. I don't know to be sure, but I'm just saying that he's not on that main card by accident. So it's a complicating factor, to be honest.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think there's something to be said for having the final fight on your free, just pay your cable bill, free card to be something that's going to maybe get people excited enough to then fork over the $60.
I guess. I just think.
I mean, it's not that it's never happened to me. I've never sat there saying, "Well, I'm not going to pay for this," and then the last fight maybe do it. But I think that there probably are some casuals who might be like, "Oh, I'm not sure. What am I going to do?" Oh, yeah, these fights are really great. There's more because they always sell. They always find a way to sell it.
7-8 years ago, the 5 best fights on the card were on pay-per-view because you wanted people to buy the pay-per-view. Now it's spread out where you're giving one solid fight to Fight Pass and a couple to FS1, and I feel like it might be hurting your buys.
They have many masters, and they don't have enough content to feed all of them and meet all their needs.
Right.
So everything gets split up in a bizarre, weird way, and that's going to be that way until they sort of consolidate the number of mediums they use to broadcast their product.
And I guess you also have to think, okay, you've got a certain amount of people who've bought this, who are buying this pay-per-view. How many more are you going to attract by taking this lineup and adding Moraes against Sun Sao to it? Are you going to add a substantial number of people? Because they always talk about how most of the pay-per-view is all about the main event, maybe the co-main. So,
I know
But it's still that added thing. We always talk about there's that third fight.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the intrigue that kind of puts you over the top. That's the type of fight you're talking about because it is one of those.
When's the last time the UFC has signed a champion from another organization and the fight has been this anticipated? I know they had Will Brooks recently, but that was on an FS1, show. That was a fight night, and I don't think there was this much intrigue because he wasn't on the same kind of run. So I feel like this should feel bigger, in my opinion, and I feel like we should be telling people who the hell Marlon Moraes is. I'm pretty sure World Series of Fighting would give him some footage. You know what I mean? Like let's see a 10-minute package online about who this guy is and who he trains with and who's going to be his core. Frankie Edgar doesn't go out to a lot of fights. He's coming from Jersey to Rio to corner him.
Thing is though, I think sometimes UFC gets a little bit of buyer's remorse. Like, in other words, for example, when Hector Lombard came over from Bellator, he was making over
Maybe that was the last one.
He was making over $400,000 for a fight, is what I was told, almost 5. And he came out and had that terrible fight with Tim Boetsch.
Yeah.
So I think they're thinking to themselves, we're not saying Moraes won't be something.
Okay.
Let's kick the tires a little bit to see how it goes.
All right, fair enough.
They're sure giving him a hard. I mean, when you look at who he's like,
Those tires
you look
make it
at
flat.
who he's fought, and now going against the Sun Sao, that's a huge leap right there.
Let's talk about the light heavyweight division. They were in focus on Sunday in Sweden. Of course, main event, Alexander Gustafsson defeating Glover Teixeira. Fantastic performance, great fight. Gets the yes afterwards from his now fiance, which was a lovely moment as well. And then, of course, Volkan Ozdemir. Who saw this coming?
Man.
Knocking out Misha Serkinov.
Greatest name in the world.
It's unbelievable what's going on at light heavyweight. Now, is it possible, Daniel Cormier actually alluded to this on Twitter, that Jimmy Manuwa was sitting cage side watching his friend and teammate leapfrog him in the rankings? Essentially, that Gustafsson, after that performance, is now the #1 guy after DC/Jones. Do we agree with this? Or now that they booked Manuwa Ozdemir, should the winner of that fight be next for the winner of the DC/Jones fight? What do you guys think?
Gustafsson.
Gustafsson.
My mind. Because, I mean, this is the performance you wanted to see from him. He won his last fight, but now he's got this, and he looked very good doing it. And I feel like, just given the fights he's had with John Jones and Cormier, I feel like you have, you know what he can bring. Ever since UFC 165, I've wanted to see that rematch because that's still, in my mind, the best fight that the UFC has ever had. That's still my favorite fight that has happened. So I still want to see those guys come together. They're already, bad blooding it back and forth on Twitter. So in my mind, that's the guy that should be there. But Manuwa, to me, and I know he was talking like he was on your show and he was making his case. To me, he's not quite there. It's just the division is there's just not a lot of guys. So he kind of goes up further. His stuff stands out more because there aren't other guys doing the same thing. So
you could say the same about Volkan, right?
Yeah, exactly right. I feel like those guys, they could wait it out more. And I feel that's, in my mind, just given who Gustafsson has fought and the fights he's had in his history and everything, he would be next.
Yeah, I would agree with you, although we still have to see Manuwa perform in his next fight. The fact that they booked him in a fight tells me that Gustafsson's the next one, not him.
Yeah.
But the fact that they booked him in a fight on the same card as Jones Cormier says that we never know. Last-minute things, sometimes things, happen. And, when John Jones gets booked for a title fight, guys, sometimes little strange things come
Cormier
up.
too.
Cormier too. That's true. They're not as
So
usually.
you're saying that fight's not happening.
They're not usually as quite
I'm
as.
just saying, don't pin it all
They're
on
not
John. They
usually
both had
as dramatic.
Right.
Cormier sort of quietly things happen to, but John Jones usually makes the bigger splash. So Manuwa could get thrown into the main event on that night.
Let me ask you the same question I just asked you guys about the Holloway Aldo fight. Deep down, UFC officials, were they happy that Gus won?
Have to be. And the reality is, Gustafsson beat Teixeira. Teixeira contended for a title.
Yeah.
Manuwa beat Corey Anderson.
Yeah.
Not the same level of accomplishment at all. Which isn't to say that beating Corey Anderson some walk in the park is not the same. Sure. And I think when you add in that rivalry and look at it, what does he do at the post-fight press conference?
Wow.
John Jones is blah blah blah, and then here comes John Jones and Gustafsson. And worst case scenario, not worst necessarily, but if that falls through, him in DC, they're going to put on a ridiculously good fight.
Yeah.
So that is absolutely, and the key there is not merely that he won. It's that it was some of the things that commentator Jimmy Smith said about Rory McDonald and his Bellator comeback. You saw Gustafsson in the Blachowicz fight, and you were like, okay. He got through it, more or less. It's okay. But he came out here and put the beat down on Glover Teixeira. Did not hesitate. I know he had some of those evasion tactics, but when it came time to swing, he absolutely put it on him. And I think everyone was like, yes, okay, we're back in business here.
It's top heavy, but all of a sudden I feel like light heavyweight is alive again, right? I mean, the stuff yesterday, John responding to him, that was great. I mean,
you needed him back in the mix, right?
Yes.
You need to get
what a villain he is.
It's great. I love. He's like he takes a shot at him. He said some
beautiful woman though.
Yeah. Congrats on the game. Wow, that to me was the tweet of all tweets. Like, wow, you're really gonna go there? And good for Gus. I thought he would ignore it. Responds today, so now he's getting. And I like the fact that DC kind of. I asked him about it. He's like, no, I'm just gonna let them, go. Yeah. So he's kind of sitting, and now you've got this love triangle going on, and you've got this guy in Volkan who I know is not the most charismatic, but holy smokes, to do that to Misha Serkinov, like I didn't think that he was really a 5th-ranked light heavyweight. I mean, I thought that was a little much after a split decision win over OSP. But now all of a sudden, it's kind of fun when these guys emerge out of nowhere, and then they put them on the fast track, and all of a sudden he's fighting, Manawan, this big fight on the same card, so he's going to be in focus. I don't know how this happened with Volkan. I did not see this coming, I will admit.
Me too.
A year ago today, I did not know who this man was. But all of a sudden, I feel like I'm really interested in 205. And of course, as you said, Jones coming back adds a lot to everything.
And I mean, if Anthony Johnson does come back at some point.
Oh, man.
I mean, it does get, yeah. Who knows if he will. But I'm just saying, like, it's finally, because you're right, it has been a bad division for a lot of years now. So it's nice to have it back, you know what I mean?
Could you imagine if, Jones DC happens, fine, winner. Gus isn't healthy, he gets married, I don't know. And Volkan wins. Could it be possible that, in a few months, Volkan Ozdemir is fighting for the light heavyweight title? It could happen.
Yeah,
right?
It could happen. Today's UFC.
Well, to me,
anything can happen.
To me, his very quick rise. I know it was last week when we talked a little bit about Yair Rodriguez and was the UFC wrong in like pushing him too far too fast, and with Frank Yeager. There's always that risk, and this is not a guy that had anywhere near the kind of hype that Yair did, but he's a guy who was given a bit of a task that would be a bit of a stretch, and he went out there and stretched his opponent, and now he has a chance to continue that very fast rise, much faster than any of us would have expected from him. That's how this fight game is. You never know what's going to happen.
The difference was,
right?
Yair was kind of like pinpointed as a guy. I don't think anyone pinpointed.
No, but still, it's a guy who's given instead of like incremental little steps, he got a pretty big step up, and he accomplished it.
And one small note here is that recall what the UFC has lost at light heavyweight: Rumble, Phil Davis, and Ryan Bader. Now, you can say those last two guys, maybe not the most exciting ones, depending on your preferences, but they were at least high-ranked, very talented guys. They're now all gone. And what you're really realizing is the heyday of the light heavyweight division was built on rematches and rivalries. It was the Couture Titos and the Couture Liddells and the Rampage Vanderleys. Those were all the fun, really fun things. Man, if you can get a couple of these guys in some rematches and some rubber matches, you can extend that out for a long time, and people won't miss everyone else.
Also interesting that Gus versus Jones, Gus versus DC, arguably the two best light heavyweight title fights of all time. Arguably.
Yes.
Gus versus Jones for sure.
Yes.
Gus versus DC was fight of the year candidate.
Awesome too.
Incredible.
Yeah. Sure. Yes.
Okay, let's quickly move along. A couple more topics. I want to ask you guys about the George St. Pierre situation. So there is a new wrinkle to it. We're not just talking about him once again.
Please shoot me in the face.
But this one is this one is fascinating to me.
Is it fascinating?
It is fascinating because, again, he always stayed true to his word. He said, "I'm not coming back in July," and they continued to push. And now he comes out and says, "They knew why I couldn't fight in July. I have an eye injury.
And Cormier, not Cormier, Bisping kind of backed him up on that. Didn't Bisping say something like, "I knew about it, but it wasn't my place to
tell"? Yeah. So how did this happen? Is this just a blunder that we need to forget about?
I don't think we need to forget about it. Like, if he's going to come back, I guess come back. I wanted him to stay retired. But if he was going to come back, all right, you're going to come back. All right? But no, I'm like, seriously, like, look, obviously the UFC.
Why did they do it?
Okay, we talked about this last week. Before it was official, Cody Garbrandt was out, they were announcing him as part of the card, put his picture on there on the email blast, tickets on sale.
That had a date.
Right. Until what I'm saying is 2 days later, they pulled it. they have a way of just trying to force things that aren't really there. And I think you saw that here as well. So they obviously have some blame. But also, I understand they probably put tremendous pressure on him. But George is not a naive guy. He is not an amateur. He got on that stage and promoted something without signing a deal. Ugh, you're part of the misleading campaign too, man. I'm sorry. Maybe you got co-opted into it, and that they're majority responsibility and you're minority, but you're part of it too, man. You played along, and you kind of led people to believe it was going to be something. I know he spoke out in the press, but you have to understand what the casual consciousness is here. It's not really about what his sort of wishy-washy timelines are.
Sure, sure.
And so I just feel like I get it medically. Everything he says makes absolute sense, but it just feels so delayed and dragged on.
Should we just scrap it at this point? Like, do you not want to?
I've never seen a fight that was brought to surface like this deflate as slowly as this one. It's like the weirdest thing. It's like watching a balloon just kind of.
Yeah.
It's so weird to me, but it's not gaining anything at this point. All it's doing is losing air. And honestly, like, I feel like the two people who want it the most to keep it the same are the two guys involved. And if the UFC sees it that way, fine. At this point, like, I don't even know. Like, I'm to that point where you just kind of. Whatever they want to do, just do it. But I'm tired of like the theoreticals.
But it gives you a headache because you have GSP coming out and saying, I still want to fight Bisping. You have Bisping coming out and saying, I still want to fight GSP. You have Dana White saying his next fight's going to be at welterweight. And then and on and on and on it goes. And I wonder if the bottom line is, does this just go back to the fact that they needed some excitement in 2017? They tried to will this thing into happening. It's the same reason why they're trying to do TJ versus DJ and some of these other fights that maybe don't necessarily make sense. The title fight in Brooklyn and things like that. And in the end, it's just one of those like lesson learned for the new ownership. You kind of can't push
I hope there's a lesson learned.
right?
Yeah, right.
All the things you just mentioned, I mean.
And also Toronto. They botched the Toronto show big time.
Right. Also, the new ownership. I mean, I just felt like they were so eager to get this train moving along and to keep the momentum up from 2016 that they made some decisions that in the fight game you can't force these guys to fight, right? And if the guy comes out after, well, then he deserves all the blame. But he didn't. He said from the beginning, he didn't tell us why. And I always found it weird that no one asked why. But, you know, to me, it's just like they obviously made the right call with Whitaker and Romero for the interim title fight, and that, I think, helps get the train back on track. But I don't know if they can keep talking about that fight now until, like, they're both medically cleared. You can't
Signed.
or signed.
So about agreement.
Or about agreement. It's just weird that, like, you have the two fighters saying they want the fight. You have the promoter who says he doesn't want the fight. You have...
I can't even keep track. What is Woodley even saying about this?
Woodley's like, let me, you know, actually Woodley texted me in the middle of my show on Monday, and he's like, no one has time for your roller coasters, George. Just tell us if you're fighting or not. So maybe he speaks for all of us.
And if this interim fight between Romero and Whitaker, if that's a great, great fight, then that's all the more reason to not
move on.
You know, yeah, because these guys, if one of those guys emerges after a dynamic performance, what are you going to want to see? You're going to want to see that guy getting a title fight. You're not going to want to see, well, let's delay him and have George step in. You know, and I don't know. I mean, I also don't want to see George step ahead of Demian Maia. Like, so there's so many different scenarios.
UFC 199 was almost about a year. It was like a year ago in a couple days, which is really crazy. Just how much the landscapes have shifted in that amount of time, just from that one fight. Just how much chaos came out of that one card.
I also think that the unfortunate byproduct in all of this is just the way people are viewing George right now. I think there's some apathy towards him, and his return should be a big deal. And you hope that they don't ruin his marketing power.
That's the thing that bothers me the most, honestly, because I'm like, just keep him out. Just keep the whole thing out. Just doing that press conference just really took the air out of it. I just feel like if they had just waited, made sure it was happening, and then went full-fledged with it, it wouldn't matter almost probably in the end who GSP is fighting. You would get behind it because you're like, wow, it's been a long time. It would just start to come back to you. But it's just the way it's been playing out. You're right. It's fatigue and it's apathy at this point.
And the other part,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, the other part is like, you know, and a lot of that was dramatization. But when they were on that stage in February, it was like, F you, buddy. And it was George saying, I don't listen to you. And then now you hear
He's good. That's really good.
And now you hear him. Now you hear Michael Bisping be like, "Yeah." So I called George on the phone, and I was like, "George, how is your eye?" It's like you blew everything up. What are you doing?
This is like Sergeant Slaughter on the Iron Sheik and he pulled over on the Jersey Turnpike. You know, it's like, wait a minute, you're bitter rivals. Why don't they just, you know, they prematurely announced the fight that nobody really wanted to see. So, you know, George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva. Just put them together. Put them together. I think Vitor was right. Legends division. You put George, put Anderson in there.
Well, let's wait for his eye to heal because you don't want to put them together. And then
Well,
have another
when the
setback,
time
but
comes,
yes.
before they turn 60.
Okay, let's talk about Roy Nelson signing with Bellator. I think that I saw the reaction to this news, and I think it was fairly positive. And I think the reason for it is, and correct me if you guys feel otherwise, no one knew that Roy Nelson was a free agent. Going into that fight, I mean, the sort of, the thing to do these days is to tell everyone I got one fight left and I'm unhappy and I want to sign or I want to test the market. I want to see what goes on when you're a free agent, so to speak. Roy didn't do that. He just showed up to fight Volkov, somewhat uninspired effort, and then just kind of, went his way. Didn't do any media going into that fight. He wasn't on the main card. And then all of a sudden, they waived the 3-month exclusive negotiation period. We know that because he fought in April and it's not July yet. And he just signs with Bellator. And I think people were like, whoa, Roy Nelson. I don't know if they were like, whoa, Roy Nelson, this is a great signing for Bellator. It was just more like, whoa, Roy Nelson was a free agent. So now that, the dust has settled on this, do we like this signing for Bellator? Is this one? Because, I did see some people say, he's old. He's 9-10 in the UFC. He's lost 3, or I think it's 7 of his last 10, whatever the numbers are. He's not on a crazy winning streak, but he was one of the faces of the heavyweight division, tough winner, et cetera, et cetera. Do you like this signing for Bellator?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a little bit of indifference towards it, but it's not just because, it's more that Roy over time has just kind of, like you said, he hasn't been killing people, and he's had a couple of pretty dud-like fights, and part of that because of the opponents they put him against. It's just, for some reason, he's lost some steam as we've gone into this. That had more to do, more than just the wins and losses. He's just lost some of his steam. But at the same time, I don't feel like he's done. Like, I feel like if you put him with the right guys, you're still going to see some fun fights, and I feel like that's what Bellator can give him.
Okay.
So there's a fun aspect to that part of it. But ultimately, I mean, he's at this spot in the UFC. He's butted heads with Dana White for so long. In some ways, even though we didn't know about it, it makes some sense to me. Like him going over and just having for the twilight of his career, basically having some fresh things to focus on, because I don't know where it stems, but you always had like this feeling that Dana and him just never really got. I mean, it goes all the way back to, look at him, he couldn't do Burger King ads. Like, look at, he's
but
always
that
going
said,
on
they
about
always
him.
kind of promoted him. They
That's
always
true.
put him in big fights. They put him on The Ultimate Fighter as a coach.
Yeah.
It was always a very strange relationship. He has the most watched fight in the history of The Ultimate Fighter, right?
That's why he's excited. He's going back to Spike.
I know,
right?
he's excited about
Well,
that.
he was a knockout guy for quite a while, but now lately he's been having these fights that have gone 3 rounds, and he's a 1-round fighter. I mean, really, he's a guy that for 1 round can really go after you. But what does he look like by the middle of the 2nd round, and what does he look like in the 3rd round? It's not pretty to watch. And so in some respects, I think in the UFC, the level of competition, guys who can extend the fights, that's not really Roy's game. If he's in there with another guy who could just slug it out and one of them's going to go down in the 1st round, that's a Roy Nelson fight, and maybe he'll find some of those over in Bellator.
I know this guy likes it because he gets that Czech Congo rematch you've been talking about.
Ratings.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would put a shotgun in my mouth immediately. No, but here's the truth, though. Look, he got everything out of the UFC that he was going to get, and the UFC got everything out of him they were going to get. It seems like he ran the full gamut of that experience, and he moved on. I doubt that they were clamoring to keep him. It works out well, for, as you mentioned, he was on the highest rated season and the biggest fight ever in the history of Spike TV. And look, I know we don't necessarily think of Roy in this way, but at 40 years old, he is part of this Legends tour that they're going to go on. I think he's a little bit more, he's got a little more left in the tank than a Ken Shamrock or something like that. I don't mean to suggest he has nothing left. And they're going to give him the same kind of thing. Carl Seu Manatafa, or whatever his name was. They'll do the same kind of scenario for him, which will build him back up. They can do another Mitrione fight. Their first fight actually was awesome.
Yeah.
So it works for everyone without being degrading of anyone.
Do you guys want to see Bellator finally bring a heavyweight title back into the mix, or does it not matter with Bellator? Because I feel like they have enough guys at this point.
It does matter. Like, it doesn't matter in the sense that, like, oh my God, I don't take this division seriously. But for long-term strategic planning, it absolutely is a priority.
Yeah,
I haven't really thought about it though. That was just something when you're like, I don't even think about their title, like anything going on that way. But I do agree. There has to be some kind of symbol and some kind of thing to be working towards. And they have enough. They're starting to get enough guys, I think, where you could actually do that again.
When Roy signed, I was, going and looking at the Bellator stuff, and it hadn't occurred to me they didn't have a champion for over a year. And
Okay, if you ask Minikoff, he still is.
but
But I know what you mean.
Yeah,
I know what you
exactly.
mean.
Kind of funny that he lost to Volkov, who's a former Bellator fighter,
Right, exactly.
on his way up. Yes,
But they've got some, there are some people that you'll recognize who they are,
Sure.
and put them in there and have them duke it out. Maybe bring back Bjorn, have another heavyweight, have a little tournament, get them together.
Amazing. Rest in peace, Kimbo Slice. But can you imagine if he was still around?
Wow.
Yeah.
They would have done that rematch in 2 seconds.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That and also been almost a year since his passing as well. I kind of feel like I want to see him fight Fedor, win or lose, next.
God, Jesus.
No?
I'm not. I mean, I didn't even think about it.
Is that crazy for Fedor?
No.
I like it.
You do?
Yeah, I mean, because you look at where Fedor is at, and you think, like, who should
Would
be
you
facing?
think Roy is too dangerous for Fedor at this
I
point?
guess I just didn't even put 2 and 2 together on that
I mean,
one.
Mitrione's just as dangerous as Roy these days,
Here's the
right?
thing. Here's the thing. I think this. Correct me. You might know better. I believe what Scott Coker told me was at that NYC presser they did
yeah.
that Fedor has not 1 but 2 fights
Yeah,
left.
yeah.
Right. So conceivably they could do it.
Sure.
I don't know if they will.
I think that's also why they don't want to do a heavyweight title fight yet and put Fedor in it because of the
point.
fact that he only has 2 fights left.
Right.
Also, Roy Nelson's former manager, Mike Hogan, is a major player there, so it was kind of a reuniting of sorts for them in Bellator. No, that's true.
Old Kogan.
Kogan's the man. Everyone loves Kogan over there. He's the real mover and shaker at Bellator.
Yeah, and won't do interviews. Do an interview, Kogan.
He's Al Heyman.
He is Al Heyman. He's just a little more visible.
He's well.
Well, he's this tall, but he's a little more visible.
Wow.
I'm teasing.
You
I'm
hear that,
teasing.
Mike? Wow. Al Heyman. All right. We are done. Out of time. We appreciate you watching us. Look at that. Right on the button.
Wow.
2 o'clock.
After last week's debacle.
2 o'clock on the button. Wow. We are real pros here. So,
No
to
laughing
recap,
And modest.
yes. UFC 212 is this weekend. It's in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And our crew is down there. Esther, Casey, the Brazilian Beast, Guilherme Cruz. Ton of video coverage, ton of photos, all that good stuff and more. So check that out on MMAfighting.com. And we are back next week to talk about that. Perhaps a little New Zealand. Derek Lewis fighting Mark Hunt. And who knows what else will be going on in the world of MMA. But for now, we shall say goodbye. Appreciate you watching. For Luke, Chuck, Jeff, I am Ariel. Again, thanks for watching and enjoy the fights.